All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this month's installment of the Inclusion Talk series as we honor Hispanic Heritage Month with the absolutely amazing Dr. Matthew Soto. I want everyone to know whether or not you are an employee at Compass Family Services or a member of the greater community, we're so excited to have you here as we honor Hispanic Heritage Month. This conversation is going to be recorded and will be uploaded to the Compass Family Services YouTube page that you will have an opportunity to watch the playback whenever you'd like. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Dr. Soto. Dr. Matthew Soto is an educator and a DEI strategist based out of Los Angeles, California. He currently serves as the inaugural Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at PATH, People Assisting the Homeless, the largest homelessness services nonprofit agency in California. In this role, Matt leads the development and implementation of the organization's equity and inclusion strategy. With his roots in academia, Matt has been a DEI strategist across different industries, including higher education, media and technology, and the nonprofit sector. Most recently, he was a leader at BuzzFeed, Inc., and Complex Networks to help build their collective DEI strategy, employee resource groups, and training and development programs. Matt is also on the board of directors for Los Angeles Room and Board, an LA-based organization with the mission of ending homelessness and hunger for college students and transitional age youth. Matt received his bachelor's degree in communication and ethnic studies from Cal Lutheran University and his master's degree in higher education administration from Cal State Northridge. Also, he's earned his doctorate in education and educational leadership and policy from Cal State Northridge, respectively. His doctoral research focused on resilience and joy of queer people of color in predominantly white and heteronormative spaces. In his spare time, he enjoys going to coffee shops, street tacos, spending time with family, and his two dogs, Murphy and Pico. And without further ado, I introduce everyone to our speaker, Dr. Matthew Soto.
Yay, and the crowd goes wild. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Rhett, for the introduction. I'm so excited to be here with you all today, specifically during Hispanic Heritage Month. What an exciting time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as we get started here. Okay, Rhett, it says that when I share my screen, you're not going to be able to play anymore, Selena, so I apologize for that. Maybe we can do that more at the end here. So thank you again. I just want to echo more of Rhett's sentiments here of really appreciating everybody's willingness and excitement for today's topic and willingness to join today's session. I know the title was probably like, oh, interesting, celebrating Latine joy and confronting expectations of resilience. This is a really important topic to me, and I'm excited to kind of dive into it with you all. And really kind of have some important dialogue and conversation today. I'm hoping that this is interactive and that we get to really engage with each other. I'm hoping to not talk at you for the next hour. I'm hoping that we get to really learn from each other and really engage with each other in that way. So with that being said, here are a couple of key disclaimers that I want to open with here. And let me just adjust my screen here so that I can still see some of you. All right, so key disclaimers. So first, I am not the expert, right? We know about tokenization. I do not speak for all Latino people. I do not speak for all Mexican people. I'm Mexican American. I do not speak for all Mexican American queer people or any of the other identities that I hold, right? I can only share my story and my experience. And other Latino people in the space, you may identify with lots of parts of my story, and I'd love to hear about that in the chat. And there may be parts that are different different, right? And you may be like, oh, that's totally different from what I experienced. And that goes for all different communities, right? And so I'm only here to share my story and kind of what I've been able to glean from my experiences. And so I'm not the expert. I'm only going to share my story and kind of what I've been able to glean from that. I also want to take some time to really acknowledge the power of storytelling, right? Today, we are really kind of leaning into that. You'll see a little bit more. We spend a lot of time putting a lot of emphasis in white dominant norms when it comes to how we do research and how we look at data and how we look at origins of knowledge, right? And so I'm here to decolonize that a little bit and really think about how our people, especially Latino people, think about how we share information, how we share knowledge. A lot of it is through storytelling, right? Usually over a cup of cafecito, right? A little cup of coffee and some chisme, some good old gossip. And so I just want to make sure that we're flipping the script a little bit today, and that we're engaging in some good dialogue around some storytelling. Engage with me. So I want to hear from you. Again, like, this is not a webinar. This is not just me talking at you. I want to hear things. So if you agree with something, I'd love to see things in the chat, right? Like, yes, Matt, that was me too. Or, oh my gosh, yes, I agree with that. Or, I don't know, my experience was different. Anything, whatever it is that, if you're having a reaction to something I'm saying, please drop it in the chat. And you all can engage with each other through these conversations as well too, right? I'm here to just set the table, but you all got to come and eat. So let's engage with this together. And then again, of course, Latine people are not a monolith, right? So we are diverse as our communities are. And so hopefully you all have done some of your own homework to really understand some of the complex diversities within the Latino umbrellas and who makes up these very complex and diverse communities. I know that Rhett mentioned that you all are going to have some really good dialogue and conversation around Hispanic and Latino Heritage Month, and get some good education around different types of communities. And so that's great. And I encourage you to do some of your own research and some of your own learning directly from the communities, right? Because my experience is very different from people who are from El Salvador or from Venezuela or from, even different parts of Mexico, right? There's such different and diversity within our experiences. So I highly, highly encourage you to engage in the dialogue and continue to learn from each other. Yes, okay, good. Miguel, good question. You said, why the graphic accent in Latine? What does it mean? Well, that is such a good transition because this is exactly where I was going, right? So we talk about Hispanic Heritage Month. And so I want to just make sure that I really break down language here, because you probably saw Latine as in the cover slide or in the title of the session. And so I just want to make sure I break down what that means and why I choose to use it. So you're going to see different terminology used by different people within Latino communities, right? And some people think that these terms are interchangeable, and they aren't necessarily, depending on who you're talking to. But I just want to make sure I break it down. So the term Hispanic, just so you know, typically means that you come from a Spanish-speaking country, right? So this includes some countries in Latin America, but could also include Spain, some countries in Europe like Spain. And so Hispanic Heritage Month is sometimes a little challenging because it won't include some countries in Latin America that do not identify as Hispanic or do not speak Spanish, right? And so this is where it gets a little confusing. Most people within the community have adopted more of the Latino or Latina identification. So most people within the community have adopted more like, oh, I identify as Latino or I identify as Latina. Now we know that the Spanish language is gendered, right? And it is gendered on the gender binary, meaning that every single noun in the Spanish language either is masculine or feminine, ending with O or A, right? And so people have typically identified as either Latino or Latina. over the last decade or so, a little bit longer, we have adopted this new term of Latinx, right? That's probably something most people here are familiar with. You have seen Latinx everywhere, Latinx, 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 and that is meant to be a gender neutral form of Latino, Latina, just a way for us to be more inclusive of folks who might be non-binary, trans, who may not want to choose a gendered form of the term Latino or Latina, right? So hopefully most of us have understood that form of the language. Latine is a little bit of a newer term that has come into the vernacular as of the last few years. And the reason why is because a lot of people within the community were pushing back against the term Latinx because they were saying that it was kind of a term that was developed by white people that doesn't really translate to Spanish, right? So if my parents who don't speak English are trying to say Latinx, it doesn't really wrap around the tongue really well. And it's not an easy word to translate in Spanish. It's not an easy way for us to say that. And so then folks have maybe pushed a little bit away from Latinx and moved towards Latine as another gender neutral alternative that sounds more like a Spanish word. And so it's not really there's not really a super correct way to do it. Everybody's going to have preferences, and it's not really up to us to police people's language either, right? So let me also lead with that. There might be some people within the community that prefer Hispanic, and that's up to them, right? That's not up to me to say, hey, you shouldn't use that word to identify yourself. That's not up to me to tell people how to identify themselves. But when I am talking about the larger community, I prefer to use Latine because I feel like it's easier to explain to my parents when I'm talking about a more gender inclusive way to talk about the larger community. But then you'll hear me talk about myself as Latino. I identify as Latino. So I hope that helps kind of break it down. And I see Camila, Hispanic is mostly used in the US and was adopted. Yes, thank you. Absolutely. You won't hear Hispanic in other countries or in other places, really. I remember growing up and watching like Spanish news and hearing things like Hispanoamerica, right? And just not really knowing what that meant because it's such an Americanized, adopted terminology. And so just want to make sure that we understand the terminology and that we're all on the same page here. Okay, so now that that's settled, let's move forward. So you know that the title here, we're talking about two different terms here, right? So we're talking about celebrating Latine joy and confronting expectations of resilience. And so I wanted to just start with a question. Feel free to answer in the chat. How do you define joy? Or what brings you joy? Go ahead, sound off in the chat. Oh, Pascal, really good point in the chat as well. Red said money. Good. Family, laughing, food. Family, food, music, alegría. Thank you. I love that. Dancing, Peruvian food. Being with my family, music, laughing, freedom of expression, my children and God. Community, creativity, well-being. My family, travel, dogs. I love it. You heard about my dogs in my bio. Family, health and safety, family, pupusas, yes. Party, cat, yes. Gym, family and music, my puppy, happiness, family and friends, peace, happiness, emotional and financial stability, good. Music and celebration, dogs, family and friends, and tamales. Someone said chicharrones. I love it. Rhett said, everyone here joining us. Beautiful. Thriving, not just surviving. Nikita, I love that. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I really love that definition, and that's going to really speak to kind of the root of the session today. So thank you for saying that. I'm going to add a little heart there. I wish I could add hearts to all of them, but we're gonna keep going. Kindness, travel, and conchas. If you've never had a concha, it's a piece of sweet bread, pan dulce. Hopefully you can try one at some point. Very good. It's called a concha because it looks like a seashell, but it's just a bread covered in sugar. What's there not to like, right? Okay, so we're talking about joy. So I'm just gonna feel free to keep dropping them in the chat here. But I just put a definition here, a feeling of great pleasure or happiness that comes from success, good fortune, or a sense of well-being. So I just really want to ground us in this concept of joy, just make sure that we're really thinking about what joy means, why joy is important for us to really think about, specifically when we think about Latina communities, right? Just if you're a Latino person in this space or a Latina person in this space, think about what Latina joy means to you, right? What does that mean? What is the first thing that pops in your head? What do you visualize, right? I'm going to share with you what it means to me, but I just would love for you to be grounded in what that means. Now, on the other side, how do you define resilience? Or what do you think of when you think of the term resilience? Just take a couple seconds this time, but if you want to drop that in the chat. My mom, Mariela, thank you for sharing. What do you think of when you think of resilience? Children and my plants. Thank you, Nikita. Perseverance, community. Thank you, thank you. Being strong, strength, family, myself, growth, forgiveness. Wow, that's wonderful. Getting up every day, keep going, strength, faith, letting go of what hurts us. Beautiful. Love, ability to persevere, grit. I love that. Getting through it. My ancestors. Erika, I love that. Falling and being able to get back up and push forward. Deep root and family strength. My mom. I love it, love it, love it. So let me define resilience here. Resilience refers to the ability to successfully adapt to stressors, maintaining psychological well-being in the face of adversity. This is just one definition of resilience, but this is the one that I'm going to use in today's context and kind of what we're talking about, right? So I want to make sure that we're really thinking about the juxtaposition of joy and resilience, right? What are we thinking about when we think about joy and when we think about resilience? Dario said, fuerza para salir adelante, right? Means strength to continue moving forward, is that translation. It's so beautiful. Thank you, Dario. Okay, so back to my cover slide here, because I just really want to ground us in our title here, Celebrating Latina Joy and Confronting Expectations of Resilience. And so how do I think about talking about Latina joy and confronting expectations of resilience? I am going to tell you through my story, right? I'm going to share a little bit about my story, my background, my upbringing. And like many, many, many Latino people, especially if you are a child of immigrant parents, your story begins, or my story begins, well before my existence, right? And so I will show you my father. So my father came to the United States when he was 19 from Mexico. He came from Cuernavaca. Cuernavaca is in the state of Morelos in Mexico. It's pretty close to to Mexico City, if you're familiar with the geography of Mexico. And he came to the US. He was kind of an orphan. He was raised by his grandmother. His grandmother passed, and he had no guardian. And he was 19 and didn't really have anywhere to go. And so he decided that he wanted to pursue a different life. He had friends that were coming to the US for work. And what I learned later in life is that he experienced unsheltered homelessness in Mexico that I didn't know anything about. My dad didn't tell me anything about this. And so he experienced unsheltered homelessness, came to the US to pursue work, and he found work. And he worked some really tough jobs and had to really endure some really harsh conditions. But he came to the US and he met my mom. So my mom was born in the U.S. She's like, well, she identifies more as Chicana. So her parents are Mexican immigrants, came to the U.S. She was born and raised in the U.S. But he met my mom, and they got married only 6 months after they met. So this is them on their wedding day with my sister in tow. So they had my sister about 6 months into meeting, and then they got married about 6 months after that. And so yeah, this is my parents' wedding day. You can see also my mother on her wedding day with her mother here on her right side and her sister on her left side. These are such precious photos to me, and such really important, mementos for me, and things that are really important for me when I look at them, because it just really aligns with this idea that had not all of these specific and beautiful circumstances lined up exactly the way that they would have lined up, I wouldn't exist in the way that they did, right? So the way that my parents met, and the reason why I'm showing you this photo, so my mom and this person here on the left is we call her my mom's sister, but she's not her sister. This is one of my mom's best friends. She was in my mom was in her quinceañera. So quinceañera is like a party you typically for a girl when she turns 15. My mom was in her quinceañera, and my dad was an older chambelán in her quinceañera. So a chambelán is like one of the male partners. It's like a wedding party, almost like a bridesmaid and a groomsman, but much younger, right? 15. And so my mom was 16, my dad was 19. They were both in this quinceañera. That's where they met. And I guess from there it was history. And so they met, they fell in love, they got married, and this was them years later. They stayed married, and they built a life together. My father became a carpenter. He became a carpenter with the California Union, California Carpenters Union, and was able to gain citizenship with my through my marrying my mother and going through the citizenship process. And over the years, they built a beautiful family together. So here's me and my sisters when we were very little. I have four sisters, but here's just I always tell my two younger sisters, like, oh, here's when life was easier before y'all were born. But here's just that when we were very, very little, we were a very tight-knit family. And I have so many memories when I think about my Latine joy. I have so many core memories of family time and just spending so much time together and laughing and watching movies and playing games, and just making sure that we were making the best out of situations. And what is so ironic about all of this is that you couldn't have told me at this age that we were suffering, because I had no idea. I had no idea until now that I can look back and learn about what was really happening in the landscape of our lives at this time. I really have no memory of any kind of suffering, because all I really know is that my parents were doing the best they could to really make our lives as wonderful as they could, right? And so when I think about what our joy looks like, I just look back at these photos, and I could get emotional right now just really looking at how beautiful my parents made our lives, right? This picture is our family here. We went to church every Sunday, and we had to wear these clothes, and I already changed out of my church clothes, but you can see my sisters in these hideous dresses that they had to wear every Sunday. But you got to peep me in my little Home Alone shirt, Macaulay Culkin right there. But this was such an important part of who we were as a family. We were always together. Here's my dad, and I. My dad used to give me my own haircuts, so you can see the terrible haircut that I have here in the middle photo. But even then, right, when I'm thinking about all of these things, it all gives me like such positive energy and smiles and just wow, like I really like I yearn for these days and I miss these days of all of this beautiful family time. And I think about, all of the context that we were living in. And it's not until later in life that I learn kind of what was really happening during all of this time. We were living in some pretty intense poverty. My dad was working some really intense jobs. My mom was trying to uphold her household while also working a graveyard shift at Walmart to try to meet bills, right? We moved at least 8 times before I was 12 years old. I had no idea. I just thought that was normal. Like, oh yeah, we're just moving again. Cool. We got another apartment. We got another place. Oh, now we're living at my tia's house. Oh, now we're living at my grandma's house. I never would have understood what was really happening, right? My baby sister was born. Here's a picture of me holding my baby sister when I was about 6. And this is when things started to change for our family. My parents decided when I was about 12 years old that they would get a divorce. And it became very challenging. And when my parents decided they would get a divorce, all of this image, all of this life that I had known, all of this joy, immediately there started being cracks in the foundation, right? Because if for a lot of us in the Latino community, you don't get divorced, right? It's such a taboo topic and a taboo thing in many of our communities. And so my parents kind of were a scandal in our community and in our family because they decided that they were not happy in a marriage anymore. And even though they had 5 children, they were going to end their marriage. And they weren't going to remain unhappy in a marriage together and put their 5 children through that kind of heartache. And now I can look back and be really proud of my parents for pushing against something that was so culturally strong and such a powerful norm in our culture. But back then it was so devastating, right? It was so like, wait a second, you're completely, washing away this dream life that we have. And so I'm sharing this with you because I want to talk a little bit about resilience and kind of what that has looked like for me and what that means because I've talked a little bit about what joy has represented in my life and in my community, and there are some core memories that I have when I think about resilience in my family now in hindsight, right? Because growing up I felt like I was in the Brady Bunch. Like you couldn't have I was in the Wonder Years, like I was in the picture perfect, like amazing life. And then now, when I learn about what was really happening, I can see all of these moments of, wow, we were being so resilient that we weren't really allowing ourselves space to to confront these pieces of resilience, right? And so I'll share this piece. So a couple of just core memories here. Complicated family and loyalty. So I put down here at the bottom, like both of my parents come from a history of abuse, neglect, systems impact. Most of my mother's family has experienced incarceration. Like I said, my father's biological parents were not around, and so he was orphaned when he was very young. And so that definitely impacted, right, the way that my parents became parents and the way that they parented us. And still, despite all of this trauma that my parents had, they never talked about it. We never, ever, ever, ever talked about it. And they still put family above all else. So when I was about 8 years old, my grandmother from Mexico, my dad's biological mom, came to live with us in the US. I had no idea at 8 years old that this was the mother that had abandoned my father. And I wouldn't have known because my dad didn't treat her that way. My dad was like, this is my mom, and my mom, my mom is my mom. And I'm loyal to family because family is a critical part of who we are as a culture and as a community. And now when I think about it, it blows my mind. Like, whoa, that's wild. You took her in and you helped her, right? Um, Labor above all else, right? Another kind of core message that I got growing up. My dad told me all these stories about when he first came to the US, he worked, like many new immigrants, worked in the agriculture field. So he picked strawberries or different kinds of crops all day long for very little wages. And then he upgraded to work at, I'm from Oxnard, California, if anybody knows where that is. But then he upgraded to go get a job as a dishwasher at the Sizzler. And so I remember one day when I graduated college, I was like, Dad, I want to take you to dinner. Like, where do you want to go? And we were driving around and we passed by the Sizzler, and he's like, oh, I want to go there. I'm like, the Sizzler of all the places, this is where you want to go. And he started getting emotional at the table, and I had no idea what was going on. And he started like getting teary-eyed, and he told me, like, I used to wash dishes here. Like, this was one of my first jobs here. I used to wash dishes, and I would work a 10-hour shift, and they would tell me at the end of the day, you're going to get $200 if you wash all these dishes. And then at the end of the day, they would hand me $50 and say, well, come back tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow you'll get $200. And what could my father do? He was undocumented. He was getting paid under the table. He couldn't fight it, right? And so those were the kind of conditions that my dad came up in. I also got the ongoing lecture that a lot of Latino immigrant parents give their children of like, you got to work twice as hard to get half of what other children in different privileged identities might get. And so uh, I grew up hearing that my whole life, right? The other piece is I always remember this in my head, and I still tell my dad this. My dad pushed us like beating out other people all the time. Like he made us super competitive for no reason. Like when we were in school, he would say, I would bring him my paper, like, oh, look, I got an A. And he'd be like, well, but what was the best score in the class? I'd be like, I don't know. I got an A. And he'd be like, no, 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 but what was the best score? Like he wanted us to be the best. And so when he would drop us off at like, if I would be dropped off at school or if I'd be dropped off at whatever, he would like stop me, grab my hand, and he'd be like, son, do your best. Like look me in the eye and tell me like, do your best. And it felt like so much pressure on my shoulders. It didn't feel empowering. It felt like, okay, I have to be the best. And I carried that well into my college years, into my work. It's still some perfectionism stuff that I'm trying to unlearn now as a professional. Assimilation, injustice, and internalized racism. Oh God, there's so many examples of things that I could talk to you about as far as ways in which my family has really come through with the resilience. But I'll share one example, our names. So my eldest sister, her name is Maria Guadalupe Soto. That is a very common Mexican woman's name. And that was she's the firstborn, and that's the name they gave her when she was born. By the time my sister started elementary school, we lived in a predominantly white area. My sister was being teased for her name. She was being called the Virgin Mary. People were like doing the sign of the cross to her at school. It was a mess. And my parents became really embarrassed that they gave her that name. Not like, what the hell's wrong with these kids? Why are they doing that to my daughter? But like, oh my God, why did we give her this name? So they gave the rest of us Americanized names. So my name is Matthew. My first name is Matthew. My dad's name is Carlos, right? Very beautiful Mexican name. And so my middle name is what they believed the Americanized version of that would be. So my name on my birth certificate is Matthew Charles Soto. My parents can barely pronounce it, but they thought that it would help me in the future with opportunity. And perhaps it has, I don't know, right? But it has definitely stayed with me now, like, whoa, like you guys really named us all white names because of this assimilation factor, right? My dad, I remember being places with my dad and hearing my dad sometimes introduce himself as Carl, depending where he was, being like, what? That's weird. That's not your name, Dad, right? So my other sister's name is Michelle. My younger sister's name is Megan. So again, like we had to really, my parents felt the need to assimilate, right? My dad, and then my dad, another way that he felt the need to assimilate was to really embody this great feeling of American patriotism. So then my dad started, like, he put an American flag outside of our house, and he would be the one at Dodger Stadium that would start crying during the national anthem. And he just became this, like, really, really proud to be an American Mexican immigrant. And we, as his children, we would just like laugh at him, like, what, why is he crying at Dodger Stadium, right? And then as I got older, it was like, oh, because it was a tough road for him to get here, and he's really reflecting on that, right? And now it's like really, really trying to unpack it has become really, really daunting to think about. The last concept I'll talk about is rest. Rest is for the weak. When I went to college, I told my parents that I was going to major in communication, and they both looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, "What do you what? So you're going to get a degree in talking? Like, what does that mean?" Right? They had no idea what my degree meant because they thought that I should be pursuing something that would pay me well, and that was it. So in their eyes, it was like law, uh, law, medicine, any of the big paying jobs, and I didn't want to do any of those things. And so I was like, no, I think I can do something good with communication. I can go into journalism. I can do this. I can do that. And they weren't having it to the point where they were like, I don't know what you're going to do with that. Like they would make fun of me, right? Make fun of me for my degree. Like I'm going to say it in Spanish and then I'll translate it. Mira este, y va a la escuela para entender a hablar, right? Like, look at this guy. He's going to school to learn how to talk, right? Just to make fun of me and that kind of stuff, right? And I'd be like, okay, whatever. And I had to learn how to be more resilient and just let that roll off my back because in my head it was like they don't really know what they're talking about, right? So, but on the other end of that, like there was no rest. My dad worked 7 days a week. He worked his 5 day a week job. He often worked weekends and then, or he often worked nights. And then every weekend he was working side jobs. He was either working on somebody's house here, he was doing this, he was doing that. He was always running around doing something. And so there was no emphasis on rest and recovery, right? And so what am I talking about, right? We have such an emphasis on the Latine community and our resilience, right? And I think that we often really, really take ownership and pride over how resilient we are as a community. And I think we should. We have overcome a lot, and we do overcome a lot as a community, especially if you are an immigrant or come from a line of immigrant families. There's even just hearing people's immigrant storylines is they're all stories of resilience and they're beautiful, right? And they're very powerful. Um, I have some facts and figures here that I just wanted to share with you. Latinos are the largest minoritized group in the US and the fastest growing. Last year, the census reported 65.2 million Latinos, approximately 19% of the US population. Approximately 18% of Latinos in the US are uninsured. An estimated 6 million Latino children living in the US have a parent who is undocumented. Nearly 24% of Latinos in the US self-identify as Afro-Latinos. Approximately 1 million Latinos turn 18 each year and become eligible to vote. We might have some of the biggest voting power in the United States at some point. Over 50% of Latino workers in the US do not have access to paid sick leave or other benefits at their jobs. And in 2019, the average Latino family had about $36,000 in wealth compared to white families having on average $189,000, a $153,000 difference. So when I look at these statistics, right, I think a lot of us would look at this and be like, whoa, we are a resilient people. We are a resilient community. We come from really experiencing a lot of hardship, and we come through resilient. I know that you all do the same line of work that we do, right? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about Latino homelessness. And so Latinos make up approximately about 39.5% of California's population, but nearly 70% of the housing insecure population in California. Economic hardship is usually due to underemployment or job loss is a primary driver for Latino homelessness in California. Immigration status remains a large barrier for many Latino communities experiencing homelessness in California. Many times we get a lot of reports that communities who are undocumented are afraid to pursue services because they're afraid of deportation or afraid of not being eligible for services because of their status. Latino housing insecurity is often characterized by doubling up in substandard housing situations in California. If you're a Latino in this meeting, you probably have either directly seen this or have known about this, right? We will, before asking for help or before seeking resources, we will put more people than are supposed to be in a specific space because we're afraid to pursue services, or we don't want to ask for help, or we don't want to do some of these things. And so this is some of the key findings that researchers have found. Latinos are being undercounted in the point in time count due to fear of seeking services. So the point in time count, if you don't know, is an annual a count where we go out into the communities and we count the unhoused. And so there's a huge a huge thought that Latinos are likely being majorly undercounted in the point in time count because they are not necessarily out seeking services. They may not be directly specifically in the target areas. There's a big need for more specific services that impact and that can directly reach Latino communities. And then distinct impacts of COVID-19 and economic hardship, right? We know that COVID-19 really impacted communities of color at much higher volumes, and specifically people who work in service industry jobs, and that's a big chunk of the Latino community. And so we know that this has a lot to do with our Latina community experiencing homelessness. And so all this to say, moral of the story, Latina people are a resilient people, right? We know that we go through a lot and things are, and there's a lot that we have against us and a lot that we overcome, right? And at the same time, what I want us to really kind of think about in this conversation is rather than celebrating our resilience, we really should be interrogating the barriers. We really should be interrogating why it is that we have to be resilient, right? And so I'm going to show you a video of somebody who says it far more eloquently than I do. So let me show you this.
Scotlandville.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got finest up in here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen.
I get paid not to mind my own business. No, really. People come to me, they pay me, and they tell me about their problems. Financial problems, relationship problems, work problems, stress, anything you can think of. And over the time that I've been doing what I do, what I've come to realize is that most of these problems wouldn't actually be problems if all of us just learned that sometimes it's okay to not be okay. But this is not the message that society sends us. Even from a young age, we're taught Big girls and big boys don't cry. We have to suck it up, put on a smile, put on your happy face. Just keep on going. Tough it out. Everybody has problems, right? That doesn't stop the world. So just put on your happy face and keep on going. ADHD, no, that's not a real thing. Lil Daquan just needs to pay attention more, do his homework, listen to his teacher, then he'll be okay. Oh, there was a death in your family? We're so sorry to hear that. You can take some time off work, that's fine. But before you go, can you get somebody to cover your shift? And are you sure you can't work from home? Because you know Zoom's a big thing now. Oh, and don't forget, you need to bring in that obituary before you can use your time off, because you have to prove that you were actually related to that person. But no, sure, take as much time as you need. Oh, racism? That was like 400 years ago. What are you talking about? This is not a problem anymore. And as ridiculous as everything I just said sounds, these are the messages that are put out there, the narratives that are told. But society and people, we wouldn't dare be that harsh. We wouldn't dare be that crude or that curt. So instead, what we do is take these same messages, these same concepts, and we put them into a box. We take the little box and we put a pretty little bow on it with some glitter, and we call it resilience. Resilience is a good thing, right? We hear that word all the time. It's to push through and overcome adversity, and no matter what, you go and you reach that goal. Resilience is defined as the capacity to overcome circumstances. And that in and of itself isn't a terrible thing. But then my question is, who determines what that capacity is? Is your capacity the same as mine? Are your circumstances the same as mine? See, resilience sounds like a good thing, and the word in and of itself isn't a bad thing. But the way that it's used and the message we send about it, that despite no matter what's going on, you have to just keep on pushing and put on your happy face, mask what's really going on. See, the problem with that is that it minimizes situations, it dismisses emotions, and it's straight up dehumanizing. Because as human beings, we come equipped with emotion, and that's just part of what it is. Let's take, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, that over a year later, we're still trying to learn how to navigate, right? A quick Google search of coronavirus or COVID-19 will bring you all kinds of articles that are titled things like, top 3 tips to stay resilient through a pandemic. And that's cute and all, but my question is, where are the articles that are titled, this is an absolute, unpredicted, unprecedented shit show, and we're really all just trying our best to navigate it? And see, that's the thing. We all are trying our best every day. Despite what's going on and what we're dealing with, we're all just really trying our best. But somehow society still finds a way to shame people's suffering.
I highly encourage you to watch that full video. It is a very powerful video. I'll send it to Rhett so that hopefully he can circulate it. But I think that what Maya B. Galoth is saying is very powerful in how we speak about resilience, right? Because I think it is a different take. It's a different take than what we usually think about when we talk about resilience. Resilience is usually something that we use as such a positive attribute to talk about communities, but we're still talking about communities of color in such a deficit way of thinking, right? We're still talking about, despite everything, all the odds that are against us, this community is resilient. And I think that it's important for us to kind of flip the script there, right? And for us to really think about why it is that our communities have to be resilient and push against the dominant standards, right? I'm going to push us a little bit past this discussion, but if you have reactions, I'd love to see them in the chat. But I was going to ask you all what stood out to you about Maya's take on the idea of unmasking resilience. How do you think her approach might shape the way we talk about resilience in communities of color? Those of you that are working day in and day out to serve people experiencing homelessness, this can really shape the way you serve your participants, right? Because your participants are resilient, 100%, and that is to be celebrated, and it is to be something that we honor in our people with lived experience, 100%. And also, we should be working to interrogate and really unmask the greater systems as to why they are in these systems of oppression, why they are experiencing homelessness, what landed them in these places, right? And why are they in a society that lacks compassion for them? I think there is a lot to unpack there. And so I'm going to push us forward, but if you have reactions, please drop them in the chat there. But when I see that video, it really does make me think a lot about white supremacy culture. And I hope that you all have had some opportunity to really spend some time with this concept and really do some of your own research around white supremacy culture. But if you have not, that's okay. White supremacy culture is just talking to us about, I know when you see white supremacy, it's kind of like shocking for a lot of people, like, what do you mean white supremacy culture, right? But white supremacy culture is just something that we are all actively participating in. It is something that serves as the status quo. It's something that we are all actively engaged in, whether we want to be or not. And it takes active work for us to really push against the standard that we're all kind of living by, right? I put this image here on the left because in preparation for this talk, I called my dad and I told my dad, like, hey, what do you think like the American dream is? Do you think it's real? And despite everything my father has overcome in his life, my dad now is like a retired homeowner. He's living off of his Social Security and whatever his retirement is, and to him, he's living the American dream. And you can't tell him otherwise. And I'm over here like questioning it, right? Really interrogating, like, but dad, you've had to really tread water and really do a lot of things just to keep your head above and really fight discrimination and mistreatment. And you've had to really go through some shit. And this is your American dream. And he's like, look, I made it to this country. I fought hard. I worked hard. And my children have made it and I'm doing good. This is my American dream. And it's hard for me to hear it, right? And this image really resonated with me on the left, right? Because the image on the person on the right who has all those locks on their door, I feel like that's my dad in a lot of ways, and my mom too, in thinking about how hard they've had to work. And that is, I think, white supremacy culture, right? Having to navigate all of these different components of white supremacy and white dominant culture, and having to really kind of wade through the water, right? I added this quote here from Kyle Wante Tranmeyer: white supremacy is not a shark, it is the water. I think that oftentimes we think of white supremacy or white dominant culture as this like big, ugly monster, and really it's a system. It's a system that we all operate in, right? Myself included. I do this work full time for a living, and I still find myself upholding systems of white supremacy when I'm not keeping myself super mindful and checked in. But when I am spending the time to really clock in and look at these characteristics of white supremacy culture, and then really think about my culture coming from a Latino community, what comes naturally to me and my community really bucks all of this, right? Individualism, we are not an individualistic culture as a Latino community, right? The we is greater than me in the Latino community, in many Latino communities, I should say. Worship of the written word, forget it, right? I don't care if you send, for many Latino communities, I don't care if you send a party invitation that says it starts at 2, we will get there when we get there, and we'll stay as long as we want to stay, right? Quantity over quality, all of these kinds of things, right? When I really, really, really think about it, the things that I have been brought up in, the things that are more indigenous to me as a Mexican American, the things that I understand as core parts of my culture and my community, completely buck all of this. And so I have to kind of go back to my roots and go back to what I've been raised to know to really do the work that I do day in and day out, do it well, right? And so I'll leave you with some of this in order to really celebrate Latine joy and really counter expectations of resilience, you have to celebrate a little bit of counterculture. And so even though our culture tells us not to rest, we need to recognize that rest is critical, right? Um, to this day, my father does not take vacations. I got to take my dad on his first vacation a couple of years ago, like left the country. And, I could cry to tell you about the joy on his face, like every corner of him stopping. We were in Spain. He had always wanted to see Spain. Go figure, he wanted to see the colonizer country, but well, I won't go there. But I took him to Spain and he wanted to see Spain so badly. And my dad took pictures at every corner, every street. He just had to take a photo. He couldn't believe that he was in Spain, right? And just the fact that we got to take a vacation and we weren't working and it was just him and I, and it was just such a beautiful experience. And I got to really talk to him about like, look, like, you see how important this is? You could have been doing this all along. You could have been like taking time off for yourself. Normalize help-seeking behaviors, right? I think that a lot of us could use this message for sure when we need help. We don't ask for help as a community typically, so this is really important. We know that community is powerful. And I'll end here with celebrating Latine joy. I have a poem. I will send this out. I really hope that you all will listen to this because I think I'm at time. But I will just really challenge you to think about what joy looks like to you, especially if you're a Latino person in this space, a Latina person in this space. I really would love for you to think about what Latine joy means to you and how do you get back to that. For me, I have to be reminded of this little boy and like this little boy that was just experiencing so much joy, so much happiness, so much family, and so much love. And if I can go back to these feelings and go back to what I know and what I have come to understand in my family and in my community, then I don't have to worry about being resilient because my Latina joy is more important. So I will end there and thank you all for listening. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. For those of you that are able, just want to give a quick clap to Dr. Soto. Thank you for being here with us, Matt, for taking time out of your day, for doing the work that we do here in partnership with PATH. So excited. We are a little over time, but if anyone has a question, I want to make sure that the audience has a chance to at least ask one question. Don't forget to send me that poem. I will send it out to everyone here and everyone under the sound of my voice. If you would, click the link in the chat. Please do the post-event survey. We work with our amazing Impact and Learning team. Dr. Soto is going to get a copy of that data to make sure that this can be even better for the next iteration of it. But does anybody have a question before I let everyone go? Does anyone have a question for Dr. Soto?
While we wait for a question too, I just want to shout out you, Rhett. I know that you're when you and I did our discovery call, I know that you're a one-man team, and I am amazed and in awe of the work that you're doing at Compass. You all are really, really trudging the way. I know in homeless services it is very rare to have roles like these doing full-time equity work, and I got a chance to really look at the work you all are doing at Compass. That annual performance report is very, very impressive. And so congrats to you and to Compass for all the work that you all are doing. This was a beautiful experience and very seamless. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you. Anybody have a question in the little bit of time we have left? If not,